Good evening, everyone. And I am Larry Parrish, and I am the Executive Director for the Shine CDC. And we have a very special V Talk that we're going to be doing tonight centered around mental health. And as you all know, SHINE stands for Sharing Hope in a Negative Experience. Let me repeat that one more time. Sharing hope in a negative experience. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce and turn it over to my co-host for tonight, Dr. Jackie, and she's going to introduce our very special guest that we have for this very special V Talk tonight. Dr. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you, Deacon Larry. Yes, as Deacon Larry said, we are doing a V Talk on mental health. It is the holidays, and we know that a lot of people are grieving during the holidays. It's not as celebratory as it is for everyone, because some people are going through depression and grief, and even contemplating suicide. So that's why we're here tonight. And we have three amazing women. We have with us, we have Deacon Geneva Boswell, who is a licensed clinical, pastoral, and temporal counselor. We have Dr. Elaine Anderson, who is also licensed clinical Christian pastoral counselor and an EMP professional counselor. And then we have Martha Kent, who is also a licensed therapist. So thank you for being here tonight. And we know that we're going to bless someone with this V Talk tonight. So just starting out, it was a week ago, we had a celebrity take his life, and he was not the picture of what we consider someone who's thinking of suicide. Every time you saw him, he appeared to be happy. So I just want to start there first. Like, with suicide, what is it, something that you just think about and do? Or, with the clients that you've had in the past, do they say it's something they thought about and attempted? Or is this something they planned out? Like, how do those thoughts even come about? Dr. Elaine, do you want to start us out?
Sure. I will start in that. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity tonight. As far as suicidal ideations, it comes about. Sometimes it comes from someone who's going through depression. They're very overwhelmed with a life situation, like life circumstances, and they actually feel that there's no way out. So of course, the only thing they can think of is suicide. I had a client this past Friday, and she expressed that she just didn't see any way out because she was so overwhelmed with work, life, children, and everything that is there. So it's more or less talking to that person and have them to focus on what is within their control.
Okay.
Because sometimes when someone gets to the place where they're thinking more or less that they're not in control of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, as life is just coming at them real fast and real quickly. And, husband is leaving, having an affair with someone else. Kids are all grown, and there's Christmas. And I don't love my job. I don't have like this. And it's just to bring that person back to the center. Okay. Asking them, okay, well, if you commit suicide, what is going to happen to your children? Who's going to take care of them? So it's asking those questions that let them think about it. She did not have a plan. She just knew she wanted out.
Okay.
And most of the clients I talk with, they don't have a plan. The person with a plan, generally, you will see them and they will go through some type of isolation.
Okay, so isolation. So that's one thing to look for. What else should we look for, Martha? What else should we look for in someone that's contemplating suicide? Like, what are the signs? I know isolation, I've heard that lots of times. They start secluding themselves from the rest of the world. What are some other things that we could look for that would be a red flag?
So some things to look for is we like to call it like risk assessment when you're thinking of someone that's committing suicide. And when you're thinking about a risk assessment, it's identifying like all of the possible risks. So, does this person have any psychotic disorders or any past hospitalization? So if it's someone that you know and they have a history of any mood disorder, psychotic disorder, alcohol or substance use disorder, like things that you would know. Some other behaviors could be if they have told you that they attempted suicide before, if they are doing these little signs like like they're pretending to shoot themselves, or making other types of gestures like they want to harm themselves. Other things that you might see is people who start to say goodbye, like, someone that's been like really, really sad, withdrawn, and then all of a sudden they seem normal, happy, and then they just want to tell you, how much they care about you and how much they love you, and, they want you to be okay. So those are really signs to look for. Is the isolation, looking at the risk factors. Is this someone who has attempted suicide? Has this person been talking a while about how they hate their lives? How things are so unfair for them, if they've been like having those kinds of rehearsals, because a lot of times with suicide, the person's worked up to it. It's not impulsive. In most cases, it's very rarely impulsive. It's they've kind of worked up to it. So you want to look at any types of behaviors that the person may have. Also, don't be afraid to ask the question. And I know, some people think, oh, if I ask if you have any plans to hurt yourself, it might lead you to hurt yourself, but that's not the case.
Oh, good. Okay.
A lot of people reach out because they really don't want to commit suicide, but they don't feel like they have any other choice. So they may reach out for help. And a lot of times they'll tell you, like, yeah, I have thoughts, I have plans, and I have intent. And so when you have those three things is when it becomes an emergency, basically, if they have the thoughts, the plans, the behaviors, and the intent.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That eye-opening. So you can ask them that question. Just be straightforward with it. And like you said, a lot of people who are contemplating that, they are seeking help. You will see some signs. And yes, and that was one of the questions I asked. Was it impulsive? I'm glad you said it's not impulsive. It is something that they've thought about. I don't just come home today and say it, and then it happens. It's been in their mind. I know we touched
Dr.
on.
Jackie,
Yes.
can I add to that?
Yes, ma'am.
I had a sort of a different situation. I had a client she had lost her son to murder. And her grief was so heavy and devastated that she didn't show any signs, but she did let me know that she had been contemplating suicide. Then she was in a troubled marriage, and she also had a very demanding job. So she had gotten to the place where she didn't think that life wasn't worth living. So she had thought about, and I think how I got it out of her, I asked her, based on our sessions, if she had contemplated. And if so, that if she was, as a counselor, we have a duty to warn. But she assured me that she wouldn't go through with it, but it was constantly on her mind.
Okay. And so you said as a counselor, you have a duty to warn. So who are you actually warning? Who are you contacting to let them know that the person is trying to harm them or thinking about harming themselves?
Well, actually, I asked her, was there a family member that I could talk to? And if not, you have a duty to warn the authorities as well.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and to add to that, as a licensed clinician, you have a a duty, to safety as well. So a duty to protect and a duty to warn. And so that would require you actually completing the emergency petition paperwork. So if someone was to tell me that, they had a plan and intent and they had the means, I would be legally responsible to take action. But we do this whole thing in therapy with safety planning, where we are working with people to kind of like Deacon Boswell explained, working with the family and the people that are around the person to develop a safety plan to keep the person safe. So if someone says like they're having ideation and intent, but no means, and they're not really sure and they don't have a plan. So we might say something like, okay, well, if it's a child, mom sleep in the room with the child for the next couple of days and then have the child reassessed in a couple of days. So we would develop some form of a safety plan.
Okay. And Dr. Elaine, being an EMT professional counselor, is that something that you would have to tell their employer?
No, because as an EAP counselor, everything that they're doing as far as their counseling is concerned, it is private.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. And we know that there's, help. So I think Deacon Boswell have brought it up about grief, right? We know a lot of people, and I've spoken to people myself and just in conversation, they're like, oh, the holidays is just not a good time for me, because they lost a loved one, whether it was a parent, a sibling, or whatever, and these times just get very hard for them. So I know there are stages of grief. I know Deacon Geneva does a lot. She's taught on that, on the stages. But what stage should we be concerned that it's more than just sadness?
Well, actually, if it comes to complicated grief, and that's when they don't see any way out. Now, the stages don't have to be in any particular order. They can go and they can come. You may not go through all of the stages. It all depends on a person's personality or temperament, and how close or how the death, like it was sometimes there were death during the pandemic. We had a lot of deaths where family members were not able to visit their loved ones in the hospital, so there was no closure. And so, but you can skip, if the first one is actually denial, but they don't have to go in any particular order. And although we said 5 stages of grief, there are more than 5 stages, but these are the most important ones that most people may go through. And again, I say it depends on your personality or your temperament, because some people will grieve more so than others and stay there a longer time.
All right. And so with temperament, so what do you mean necessarily by temperament?
Temperament would be the same. Some people call it a personality.
Okay.
In our pastoral Christian counseling that I do, the temperament would be an inborn temperament that God placed in each of us at birth. And those temperaments, most people have heard of the 4 temperaments, the choleric, the sanguine, the melancholy, and the phlegmatic.
Right.
But through my license, there is a 5th one called the supine temperament. So it depends on that temperament. A choleric or a sanguine may not grieve as deeply as that melancholy and that supine, and nor will the phlegmatic. So it all depends on that person's temperament.
Okay, thank you for explaining that, because I know I took the course when you used to teach it, but I know there's some people listening might not have known all those parts. So thank you for sharing that. That's very important information, and probably have, people gonna probably call you and ask you more about that information or send you an email, because again, so everyone, since all the different personalities, that means that everyone, regardless of what they're going through, won't react the same way to things.
Right.
Right. Some things where we think like, oh, well, that's so small, to somebody with a different type of personality, that could be the biggest and baddest thing that ever happened to them. So knowing that does give you that. So
and Dr.
anyone
Jack,
yes.
If it is, and for example, if you are a melancholy, they tend to struggle with depression and anxiety. So those are the ones that grief will affect them even more versus a chloric or a sanguine. And so those who tend to have those prone for depression. Yeah.
Okay. And so, Dr. Lane, so clients that you see that come in that are grieving, like what are some tips, especially around the holidays, that people who are grieving, right, depending on, again, as Deacon Boswell mentioned, they can be in any stage, but how do you help them cope to get through the holidays? Because this is a big time right now.
Exactly. Well, my method of counseling my clients, or the clients that I see as far as grief is concerned, I go through what are the stages of grief, and identify the stage that they're in. And once we identify those stages or what stages they're in, then what we do, we've gone through, okay, what are you doing? What are some of the things that you're doing? Because sometimes they may be going through depression, because one of the biggest one is depression that they go through. They find themselves isolated. So more or less, okay, we need to start being more active, more interpersonal with your family members, emotional connection, social connection, having conversation with your family. One of the things that when someone is grieving, they might neglect themselves. So we talk about self-care, how to take care of yourself. We talk about nutrition, because sometimes they don't eat well because they're suffering from grief. We talk about how to keep the memory of your loved ones, keeping that memory, talking more about them, because the more you talk about that loved one, is more you feel more or less that someone is listening. And the key factor is that everyone grieves differently.
Right.
And sometimes one person may be thinking that, well, I have a client just recently, her fiance was murdered in Baltimore. His mom is grieving on a different level than she is. So it's more or less, you don't watch what your mother-in-law is, how she's grieving, focus on you and how you're grieving.
Right.
And what are some of the things that you need to do to make sure that your self-care, taking care of yourself, making sure you're eating well, making sure that you're having your social connection. Because we know from COVID, the importance of having that social connection, talking to people, connecting with others, that emotional connection is important. So it's more or less encourage them to do that, and to stay abreast of your family around you. Do not go into isolation. Again, and everyone grieve differently. As Deacon Boswell talked about the different temperaments and so forth. I have studied that also, but what I do, I separate. I said, okay, the introvert and the extrovert. The extrovert grieve differently than the introvert, and break it down like that. So after talking with that person, you can know whether or not they're introvert, extrovert based on your assessment, and move in towards, okay, how do you handle this grieving process and so forth. And the key is rest, take rest. Don't focus on what everyone else is doing. Focus on your self-care. Focus on keeping your mental health, because you're responsible for your mental health. And just talking to others. Laughter, find fun in something, and don't believe that because you're having fun, you're not missing your loved one.
Right.
What would they want you to do? Would they want you to suffer? Would they want this for you? Tell me, what would your loved one want you to do? And most time, 99%, they want you to be happy. Okay, so find someone, don't give yourself some permission to be happy. Give yourself permission to love again. Give yourself permission to just being you. Because, the Bible said, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. So when is your morning?
Right.
It's when you wake up from that grieving process and said, okay, I must do something. Do something. Because if you don't do anything, you're going to get stuck.
Right.
But doing something to
Yes,
yourself.
I'm glad you touched them. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned introvert, extrovert, because I was like, she's in my head, because that's what I was going to ask when you answered it. I was like, yeah, because as far as like isolation, there are some introverts, that's their normal. So like for someone who's that, how do you check on someone who that's what they are? They are not ones who come into the family gatherings. They just like being by themselves. Even if they come to a family gathering, they'll start in the crowd and then they'll end up in a chair by themselves and they're perfectly fine, but it will appear to be fine. But how do you engage someone who's like that to find out how their mental health is, if something tragic has happened? Martha, you want to chime in on that?
Sure. I was just going to add that there's a difference between grieving and mourning. So grief is what we feel on the inside, and the mourning is what we express. And so when we look at it, we can't really judge, how someone is processing their grief because it's really personal. And so one of the things that I like to do is to make sure that people sit with their grief and that they understand that their grief is okay, because it can look however it needs to look, because you have to do what you need to do in that moment. So if you need to scream, if you need to yell, no matter what you need to do, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. So when I'm thinking of an introvert versus an extrovert, I think that because grief is very personal, I think that you would ask them like, hey, are you okay? Are you eating? Is there anything that I can do for you? So you would reach out, as Dr. Elaine said, to see if they have like basic needs, and just let them know like, hey, I'm here for you if you want to talk, or encourage them to go out, for a walk. So you'd want to, I like to say prayerfully attack, or, attack it, for lack of a better word. Try to figure out what that person needs. If it's someone you kind of know some of the things that they like. So they may not be a person to go to all the family outings, but they may go with you and have coffee. So try to find a way to speak to that particular individual's needs.
Right. So a lot of this, I think Dr. Elaine had mentioned that grieving, one of the signs is depression. And we know depression can show up in many ways, right? For many different things, whether they're grieving or, stress at work, stressing, again, being a parent, lots of things. So what are the signs of someone who's going through depression, right? And when does it become to where, now I'm not sure in your practice, do people just reach out on their own, or do they have family members calling, or how does that work? How does it, manifest to where they're getting counseling?
I can speak on what happened in my practice. Because I am an EAP professional, the clients are referred to me.
Okay.
So the assessment comes in as a depression, that this person is going through depression. So one thing that we really need to understand about the depression, of course, the sadness is there, lack of fulfillment, no energy, you don't want to get out of bed in the mornings, don't want to do anything at all. But there is another piece to that, is called SAD. Seasonal affective disorder, shows up just like depression. And that starts at about November all the way through to spring. So when someone comes in my practice and they talked about depression, we go through the assessment. The first thing I ask, when was the last time you see your primary care? Have you been tested for low vitamin D? Because the vitamin D in the summertime, we get all that vitamin D from the sun.
Right.
In the winter, we're not getting that vitamin D, so we're more indoors. And the people that are, especially darker skinned people, who really the sun doesn't really do much for them,
right?
They tend to go through that seasonal affective disorder.
Okay.
So the first thing that I try to get them to do is start get a supplementing. And 99% of the time, they were diagnosed with low vitamin D and they stopped taking their medication. Right. And all of a sudden they find themselves in this rut. Okay, let's do the first thing. Let's get back on your vitamin D, because that's what helps their depression to suppress that depression. And also your omega-3 helps with your mood. So it's getting on those two supplements, the vitamin D and the omega-3. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can only tell them about over-the-counter drugs.
Right.
Supplement that will help them. And 99% of the time, that solved the issue. Then we move into, okay, brain. Everything started in the brain.
Right.
Everything. What conversation are you having with yourself? Change that conversation. Start having some brain food. I have them to start taking all the berries, the blueberries, the strawberry, raspberry, and all that berry, and every morning make a smoothie for yourself. That's your brain food. Changing your nutrition, your diet. Stay away from white bread. Stay away from all that carbs, because carbs turn into sugar. Sugar is a stimulant.
Right.
Lower your intake in coffee. Coffee is a stimulant also.
Right. So
the more stimulated you are, your brain isn't settling down.
Right.
So of course, you're gonna feel anxious.
Yep.
And depression comes in, and then all of a sudden you're in your bed and you don't want to get out.
Right.
And believe me, it affects a lot of employees' performance. And that's the reason why they come into my space, because of their performance level.
So there was a noticeable change by a supervisor or someone, and that's how they get referred to you.
And right, or they themselves recognize that they need help. I just don't feel right.
Okay. So
they're just sluggish and all of that.
Right. So yeah, so I know you mentioned that, psychologists can administer, prescriptive psychiatrists can administers medication, prescribed medication. So in your practice, any of you, when has it been to a point where you know that one of your clients needed to go to that next level of needing medication?
For me, I would say when they're not feeling better, when their symptoms are so intense and frequent to the point that they're not even able to engage in the therapy and the exercises because they're experiencing so much distress, and you've worked with them for quite a bit of time. Even getting people to the point where they're willing to take a medication assessment is really, really challenging. So for me, one of the tactics that I typically use is I say, well, how bad does it have to get before you take a medication evaluation? So we kind of chart it out in the beginning. So we say, you're staying in the bed 2 days out of the week. So if you start missing work, and you miss work 3 days out of the week, that's our bottom line, right? And so we kind of come and form an agreement to, all right, I felt I have some kind of measurement in my mind because I know I can document that I'm feeling worse because, it's really important to collect data. And so we have them to work to gather the data. So you've been in the bed for 4 days, you've missed 3 days out of work. How did you do the week before? Okay, now let's really talk seriously about getting a little bit of help with medication. And then that's okay.
Right. Because I know a lot of, in some of those cases of mental health, when you need medication, it could be, again, it starts in the brain. There's something else besides just your thoughts. It could be an imbalance of, hormones and everything.
Hormones and chemicals.
And I mean, I'm glad Dr. Elaine touched on, because that's kind of when she talked about, your nutrition and things like that. Those are things that even if you don't, not suffering with any mental health, those are kind of things that are preventative, right? The vitamin D, just because you don't know. Some people, I'm assuming, come in like, I don't know why I'm so sad. But again, if it's during that time frame and you do your questionnaire, getting your data, then oh, this is sad, seasonal affective disorder. So that it's not clinical depression, right? So what are some other things that we can
Dr.
do?
Jackie,
Yes.
I normally will recommend to my client to go and see their doctor, talk with their doctor to see if there is a medication that they can give them. Also, I would say make sure you have your annual checkups. And that's a good way, because when I had my physical last couple of weeks ago, and from my blood test, my doctor called me or sent me a text to say, I need you to get this medication. I need you to get some vitamin D, and I need you to get vitamin E, because she saw something in my blood to let me know that I need to be on these different vitamins. So that's a good source. So if you make sure you have your annual checkups, because your doctor can zero on a lot of things, even depression and all of that, and can make recommendations to you.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Yes. So nutrition and your annual physical, again, getting that blood work. Your blood tells you literally everything about your body. So that is very good information. So so do you think, we're talking about mental health now, so do you think that mental health is losing the stigma, or do you think we still have a lot to work through to get it to where it's a normal conversation?
Well, based on some information that I read, that yes, more people are talking about it now. And so whereas one time it was a stigma, but it's becoming less and less of a stigma now, because more people are accepting it and they are talking more about it.
That's good to know. Yeah, so it's good. I mean, because it was a lot of campaigns for mental health. And I think it's one of the health observances that has stemmed across multiple months. They, even though it has a month in it, but I think because it's so much going on in the world, and the pandemic itself, I think it's a lot more. And it's good, like Dr. Lane, that there are employers that are paying for this, right? It's not even just your insurance, it's just the employer paying for that, and you're not even have to do that, use your own insurance. So that is good to know that a lot of workplaces are becoming more in tune with their employees and knowing that this is a needed service. So I know Deacon Larry is going to come in shortly with some questions that we had in the chat, but any last things that you want to tell people, especially who might be experiencing depression or having suicidal thoughts during this holiday season? Like, what are some things? Everything you've been saying has been inspirational, as far as saying, get up, allow yourself to love and things like that. Just hearing that just makes me smile, so I know just hearing certain things and hearing, especially all three of you, the calmness in your voice. And I'm sure you get a lot of clients and patients that, do well, right? For one, because you're God-fearing women, but two, is because, you definitely were purpose for what you're doing. just by this conversation and listening to you. I haven't seen a therapist before for anything. And I know I was on a work call once, and they had someone come in, and she's like, you need to treat it as a yearly physical, right? Get a tune-up. Don't wait and find a therapist when you need one. Already have someone that you've already learned to entrust, just to have conversations, just to have your talks, things that you might put in your journal just to express them. But again, any last things that you want to say before we get into the question and answers?
One thing that I would suggest with someone going through depression and anxiety is it's about 4 things. The first one is being able to let go of the things that you cannot control and focus on the things that you can. Focus on what you have and what you don't have. And once you look at what you have, then make a decision on that. In life, things do happen. Pause, reflect, then have a plan of action. Deep breathing exercise. That helps to clear the mind. Exercise itself. Yoga, something that you can do in 5 minutes, at least take 5 minutes for yourself. And I'll talk to others and they'll say, well, I don't have time. Well, what about when you lie in your bed at night and you just do your deep breathing exercise and you do some meditation, and your meditation could be on the 23rd Psalms. And you just focus on what God is doing right there. And then the next thing, you journal your thoughts, dumping those things out. Use your journal as a dumping ground, dumping those things out. And then focus on how amazing life is. And if you should leave this planet Earth, will you leave empty? Or will there be so much more in you that you did not give? Because life is worth living.
Yes. Amen to that. Deacon Boswell?
Yeah, I was just, I thought about something today. I had a annual mammogram, and which none of us like having.
Right.
Have to. And so when I went, I mean, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And so what should have taken me maybe 40 minutes took almost 3 hours because of different complications. And so finally, when I got in to have it done, and the young lady who did the mammogram, so I asked her when she was done, I said, did you do this all day? And so she said, all day long. I said, okay. I said, I'm a therapist and I talk to people all the time. And so just having that conversation with her and asking her that question, she said to me, I think I'm depressed. And I think I need to see a therapist. Wow. And so I took that to mean, and I was actually really, because what should have taken a shorter period of time, but I understand how I believe it was orchestrated by God to have this conversation with this young lady, because she said she had had back-to-back death. Her mother passed, then her father passed. She went through a bad divorce, and it had been almost 10 years, and she knew she's still grieving. So I said, you need to talk to me.
Yeah.
I offered her, my telephone number, because she actually called my cell phone while I was waiting. And I said, you already have my number, so just give me a call. And I have her number, so I will reach out to her. So sometimes it's, and all the other things are great, but sometimes just having a conversation will open a door for people to tell you that they know they need to see a therapist.
Wow. That's amazing. Yes, God. Yeah, that was definitely divine intervention right there. Even though it took you 3 hours, but you saw it. You saw why it took 3 hours.
And I actually got my mammogram.
Oh, thank goodness.
So
we know it's going to be negative. We know it's going to be negative. All right. All right, Martha, and then we'll have Deacon Larry bringing the questions in.
Okay, so one thing that I would say is that everything is impermanent. Like nothing that we experience is permanent except death. And so everything will pass. It might feel like it's forever, but it really isn't forever. So it's really important to just constantly remind yourself that this is just a moment that I'm experiencing. It's really uncomfortable. I am suffering right now, and it is okay for me to suffer right now, but I will feel better. I will feel better. So thank you.
Thank you, Deacon Larry.
All right. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Before we get to some of the questions, though, we want to just say this. If someone may be struggling with suicidal thoughts, you can call the U.S. National Suicide Prevention, not hotline, but lifeline. And that number is 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255. I thought that was very important. So some of the questions that are coming in, and we have a few, and the first one is from Queen, and she says, how do you reach a person that has already tried and failed?
I think we too often forget about presence. Sometimes it's just a matter of being there for a person. I don't understand fully the context of the question, but it's really
I think they're
about.
saying that if you reach the person, you've already tried to reach this person and you tried to talk to them, but it seemed like it failed. Keep going back to that person.
Yeah, I would say presence, just letting that person know that you are available, letting them know that when they're ready, that you're there to talk to them. And then again, try to figure out what kind of basic need that they may have that you could supply. And then it's also important to get into a spirit of listening, because sometimes when we go around people, we want them to talk and talk and talk, but we don't stop talking to give them a chance to talk. So if it's somebody that we're trying to reach, we want them to hear all these encouraging things that we have to say, but sometimes if we could just sit with them and just say, hey, I'm here. I want to sit with you with whatever you're going through, and we don't even have to talk. We'll just be here together.
Anyone else want to?
I would add to that, Deacon Larry, and I agree with Martha. One of the things that I would recommend is active listening and empathy, listening without any judgment. Because sometimes we want to tell people, do this, A, B, C, and D, and you will feel this way. And they don't want to hear that. They just want someone to listen. And once you move off of that, giving directives and just being there, as Martha said, being present, listening, and that takes skills to be able to listen to someone, being present there, and rather than saying, I know how you feel, because you really don't know how that person is feeling. It's just reminding, I'm here for you. And I will be here as long as you need me. And do it with love. Because a person can tell whether or not you're genuinely concerned or you just want to get in their business. It's just being genuine. Be honest, be open, and be transparent.
Awesome.
Deacon Larry.
On to the next question. Okay, I'm sorry.
I think you said the person said they had tried and failed. Okay, and just like everyone said, just sometimes so apparently the person must have some type of contact with the person, and sometimes it's good to, just like the rest of the counselors said, just let them know that you're here and make it very, very short, not a long conversation. And sometimes you can just text and say, I'm praying for you, and that's it. Not ask, how are you doing? Because obviously there are problems, and sometimes, just like I think Martha said, just listen and just be in their presence. Because a lot of times you don't have to say anything. Sometimes you can just observe the person and you can tell that something is going on with them.
Awesome. This question right here is kind of complex, so I'm gonna try to put it in. What if we have a family member who is suffering from mental illness, but there's other risk factors that are involved, such as legal issues, financial issues, family issues, and you want to try to help the person, but if the person is an adult, then you've got the legal issue there, you've got the financial issues there, and you've got the family issues. What do we do with some of those risk factors?
What I would suggest to this person is more or less the same thing that we've said before. Sometimes people don't need our help, and we're trying to be the savior. We're trying to be El Shaddai, the Jehovah Jireh. And sometimes people just want you to know that you're there. And just as we said before, just being there and not giving directions of how they could have done something is by just listening. And sometimes you may say, well, what are your thoughts? And just allow them to talk without any instructions or any directions, because generally they will come up with their own thoughts and how they can solve these issues. Because when it comes on to mental, if someone is not at risk, there's nothing you can do for them. Okay, they have to be at risk to themselves. Okay, so and pray. Oh my God, just pray for that person. Pray that God will give this person the wisdom to be open so they can receive whatever you're trying to impart within their lives. Because prayer moves mountain and prayer moves the hands of God. The fervent, effective cry of the righteous availeth much. Just pray.
Thank you.
And touch. If you can touch that person and they feel that contact, that body contact, just touch them sometimes. Just give them a hug sometimes. You know, you might have to put your mask on or something, but just embrace that person and just say, I am praying for you.
With that question,
need to know.
yeah, with that question, Deacon Larry, I wonder, were they even speaking of like someone who might be schizophrenic or bipolar? Because they said legal issues. So I'm assuming like if this person isn't taking their medication, obviously, you know, there could be some problems. So, and it said they're an adult. So I mean, that's kind of where I went with that, where they were going with that, to find out like, what can you do?
Right.
If the law and everything else says this is an adult, and they're not taking care of their mental health, you can't do anything.
Can't do anything.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Pray. I think you said it best, pray.
Yeah.
Deacon Larry,
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a family member who is mentally ill, bipolar. And when she doesn't take her medication and she go into that manic state, it's not a lot that you can do. And one thing they hate for you, anyone who is suffering a mental illness and taking medication, they do not like for you to ask them, are you taking your medicine? Something about that just sets them off.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can actually do is to pray. Because if they don't like for you to pray, you can't, they have that doctor-client confidentiality. So it's not a lot that you can do.
I just wanted to add, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I was just going to add, you know, the Bible says to watch and pray. And so we definitely should be praying and covering them, but we should also be watching. And depending on your proximity to the person, you want to make sure that they don't have any access to lethal means to end their life. So if you have guns in the house, keep them locked up. Pay attention to where the knives are. Look around the house and see if you have prescriptions out. Make sure that you keep those things, locked up or put away. So I would say I agree with everything that everyone else has said, and to allow people to have their space to deal with whatever it is that they're going through, because that's kind of how we respect them. But the other side of that is really to just watch their behaviors and just make sure that they don't have access. So if they're buying a gun or knives, then you kind of want to intervene and call a crisis hotline on their behalf.
Thank you. So we got another one here. So what are some things that can help you if you're grieving and you're having trouble with it? What are some of the things that can help you through that process if you're grieving?
If you're grieving and
you're having trouble with it. I'm grieving and I'm just like, it's not working for me. I prayed and I just don't even know what to do next. How do I get through that? I'm having trouble getting through this grieving process. How do I get through this grieving process?
I would say, I'm sorry, Ms. Boswell.
Well, they actually do need to reach out to someone. They need to reach out to a therapist, or they can reach out to their a minister, or you can actually go into any church now and let them know you're going through some things, and they will take the time to talk with you or refer you to someone. But if you don't do anything, one thing about grief is it will come out in some form. It may come out in anger, it could come out in promiscuity, it can come out in spending. It doesn't, if you do nothing about it, it just lays dormant, but it will come out one way or the other. So I would suggest that they seek out help. They can see their physician, and physicians will recommend them to go, some places. And then you have places that they can go to that they can just, like, I want to say hotline, and they can also, VGC has a grief ministry. They can reach out to Good Grief at victorygracecenter.org. We're there to help walk people through their grief, through their crisis, through their grieving and their bereavement. So there are a lot of places, a lot of churches, and I would recommend that this person reach out to VGC, Grief at victorygracecenter.org. And we walk along with people. We meet once a month on the fourth Tuesday of each month at 6 o'clock by Zoom and Facebook. So that would be a good source to reach out, reach out to us. And that is no charge, because the ministry, VGC, has so many ministries that they can reach out to. So there's a start right there. Contact Grief at victorygracecenter.org.
Awesome. Deacon Lane, you want to chime in, and then Martha?
General, I was just going to add to what Deacon Boswell was saying, is finding a support group that will be able to help them. And reach out to family members. Don't be isolated. That social and emotional connection is really, truly important. And get active. Get back to your normal activity. You might want to try to just scale it back, have a routine, schedule a routine for yourself, a daily routine that you're committed to doing something for yourself. Because the key is commitment, consistency, and the result, you will see the result. So it's connect with someone. Do not stay in isolation. Social connection, emotional connection, those are the two pieces. Activities, do some exercise, go to the gym, Do something. Because the gym, what it does when you do your exercise, it releases the chemical to your brain, that happy feeling, so that you feel so much better. Okay. Talk to someone. It's really, truly important to do not suffer in your grief, because there's so much more. As Deacon Boswell mentioned, there here at Victory Grace Center, we have that support group, support group. So there's so much more. There's so much that you have than what you don't have. Focus on what you do have and what is being offered to you.
Awesome.
And Deacon Larry, also for this call, let them know that what we do in Good Grief is confidential. Now, when we have the Zoom, there are several people on there, but if they reach out to us, then we will, Stephanie and myself, we are there, and what they say, and is held in confidentiality. So
Gotcha.
they feel, a little better or freer about contacting us.
Awesome.
So I just wanted to foot stomp everything that's already been said. I think that is the most solid advice, is to reach out, but also, flip the mirror, accept where you are, and accept that, you're really struggling in this place. But aside from that, you could also try to figure out how you can honor the person's legacy. Because a lot of problems that make grief even more complicated is that we try to deny it and push it away, and we struggle with grief rather than letting it just flow like it needs to. And so coming to a place where you can honor their legacy, even if it's a very small thing, though that could actually help release some of the anger that you're feeling that because this person was taken away.
Mm. So let me ask this question as we get ready to close. So what are some signs, because I missed them, and I had a sister that did commit suicide, and she called me and she never did this. She said, I love you. And I said, well, I can't talk to you right now because I'm working. And after we knew the signs, but what are some things that people can look for? Because she was definitely crying out and we all missed the signs. So how do you pinpoint, how do you know some of the signs that someone who is suffering and may have been suffering in silence and didn't let anybody know, but they did say goodbye and everybody missed it?
Isolation is one. You cut yourself off from family and friends. Depression. I do have people who they just stay depressed in their beds, don't get up or anything but that, to cut themselves off from family and friends. And then sometimes, as we see on TV, a lot of people commit suicide. And I won't necessarily say you don't see the sign, but they can hide it very, very well. Because a lot of times people going to commit suicide will not let you know any kind of way. That's how people miss it. A lot of times people will talk about doing it, but they're actually just reaching out for help. Those people who do commit suicide, they're not going to tell anybody. They just do it. So that isolation, I would say, they stop doing a lot of the things that they used to do. They just separate themselves and go into isolation. It's a good sign.
And to piggyback on Deacon Larry sharing that, what do you say to those who are, if they did lose a loved one to suicide, who missed the signs, the guilt that they might be having? How do you address that for them?
Well, I think even if they, and then sometimes it's actually nothing that you can do if they are really committed to doing it.
Right. No, the guilt that some might
guilt.
carry because they say, oh, they called me, I missed it, I didn't know. And now, because that guilt could turn into depression and then other things as well. So like, how do you address that person, or that family member, that friend who was like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know I was with them, but something like that.
I can speak to that. I just completed about 8 weeks of counseling with this one person who her husband committed suicide. She had no idea that he was about to commit suicide. And when he did it at his mother's house, and she found his body. And one of her biggest thing was guilt. Because so many times he would have said to her, you don't love me, you don't care for me. But again, we go back to that introvert, extrovert, and love language, because everyone show their love in a different way. So in order for us to be able to get to the place that we can say to the person that you may be feeling guilty, but think about everything that you yourself might have done to help your loved one. You show love the best way you could. Okay. If you knew that this person was going to commit suicide, they didn't give you the opportunity to stop them, because that's a decision they made. And if it wasn't their time to go, God would have stopped it.
Right.
Because so many times people attempt to commit suicide and someone showed up.
Right.
So not taking it personal. Yes, you're feeling guilty. I could have and I should have done something, but you did the best that you could.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Based on the knowledge that you had.
Right.
That's what you did.
That's good.
And you loved that person while they were here, and you showed them that love. And you were always open to them. Okay.
Well, I can't believe we've already at the hour. I mean, I don't even know where the time has gone, but again, it's the holiday season and there's an empty seat at the table. I love how Dr. Jazz talks about that. There's an empty seat at the table. Who do I reach out to? Who do I reach out to? I'm missing my mom. I'm missing my brother. I'm missing my wife or whoever. There's an empty seat at the table. Christmas is 5 days away. So we purposely put this V-Talk together right in the middle of the beginning of Christmas. So that people are saying that I got this empty seat at the table and I am just not going to know what I'm going to do this Christmas. Where do they reach out to?
Well, for Victory Grace Center, we do have a counseling ministry. And here in this counseling ministry, we walk with VGC partners with the Word of God and give them practical tools and techniques how to manage these life interruptions. How do you, at that seat, I still have an empty seat at my table. Okay, it was 5 of us, now it's 4. And that seat will always be empty. But it's more here now is keeping that memory alive. Keeping that memory alive is so amazing. And one thing that I would say with that person who have lost their loved one, do something to keep that memory alive. What I've done, everywhere that I lived, I plant a tree, a plant. And each time that rose bloom, that reminds me of my son. And that rose only bloomed once a year with one rose, just to remind me that his spirit is still here. So do something in remembrance of that loved one.
Wow.
And
just something. And you may live in a house, you may live in an apartment, but you can have a plant. Just that one plant, this is in memory of my dear loved one. Yes, that seat is going to be empty, and it will always be empty because no one can replace that person. But the memory that they left you is so amazing. The
Keep the memories
beauty of
alive.
that person
Yeah.
is so amazing.
Wow.
And just think about the awesome memory that you have in person.
Awesome. Thank you.
Focus on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Deacon Larry, and like Deacon Elaine said, and I often, sometimes I tell clients, you can still talk to the person, or you can talk to Jesus. And because I used to would say, Jesus, will you give Tom a hug for me? Or talk to the person, because the only difference is they're in another, they belong to the Lord, in another time zone. And also one of the things I did when my first husband passed, my children, someone sent me an ornament, a beautiful ornament with his name and his death date. And I put it on my Christmas tree every year. We talk about, my children and I, we talk about him a lot. And with Cliff's first wife, she made angels. So each year we will put those on our Christmas, I put them on our Christmas tree as a reminder of what they mean to us. And so I was just say, talk to them.
Talk to them.
And, or you can just write them a letter to tell them how much you miss them and how much, talk about the fun times, because your loved one, just like all of us have said, they would want us to be happy. And I also tell people, if because this is what the Lord showed me, that he said, if you could only see me now, I don't have cancer. If you could only see me with the Lord, you would never shed another tear. You will not be so depressed. If you could only see me now, I am walking on streets of gold. And then, and because that's the truth, they would not want you depressed. They will not want you to want to end your life. They will want you to live. And also to let you know that they're praying for us,
right,
more than you are praying, because if they're with the Lord, they already know the outcome. And so they're a part of this great cloud of witnesses now, who are praying for those of us who are back here. If you could only see me now, you will never be depressed or shed another tear.
I like that. I like that. I like that. Well, Dr.
I have one.
Anderson.
I have one thing.
Okay,
one really quick.
Okay.
If none of those things work and you still find yourself really, really feeling hopeless, reach out to 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I would say something also, Larry, as I mentioned before, that here at Victory Grace Center, we do have a counseling ministry. And if someone should have a need, is to reach out to us at therapy@victorygracecenter.org. And we will be more than glad to walk with you through your journey.
Well, this has been an awesome V-Talk. Thank you, Dr. Elaine Anderson. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Deacon Geneva Boswell. And thank you, my co-host, Dr. Jackie. You guys have done a phenomenal job. Thank you so much. I'm getting texts from people who didn't have a question, but they're saying this was so informative. This was so helpful. So I know by us doing this, I know we've touched a life. And then if you can't do any of that, we're going to end on this. If someone you know may be struggling with suicidal thoughts, you can call the U.S. National Suicide Prevention, not hotline, but lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255. Thank you so much, and may God bless you this holiday season. And remember the memories, and it's still okay to talk to them. Thank you all. Good night, and God bless.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Deacon
Blessings to
Larry.
everyone.